Now, getting back to the central banking question, one of the main reasons that this idea develops of a central banking cooperative, from my perspective, was to deal with the problem of banks having favourable in the fractional reserve banking system, i.e. the Federal Reserve is not federal and it's not a reserve of money. It was once a private bank, but now it's owned by the government. But it doesn't have any true reserves, you know. Those are all owned by private banks within the system of the Federal Reserve. But each one was supposed to have a slightly lower, each bank down to, from the high street down to the main street, banking main street as the Americans say, to investment banks, to other Federal Reserve banks in the system, were supposed to have different amounts of gold backing those coins, and that's backing that currency, which is of course what Ron Paul is trying to do to get an audit of the Federal Reserve. And within that fractional reserve banking system, you're producing all this cash, but the favoured status of banks means that they're going to get a lower interest rate, whereas you're paying a higher interest rate. If you had the central bank as a cooperative, with the share price rising and the currency being in harmony with the amount of economic activity, and it's closed off from international speculation, then you're going to have an interest rate for everyone which is equal. And the only way you're going to make money, new money, is by producing new technology, working harder, and doing research. So in that sense, it's more like the idea of a city with good rules, you know, like Paul Romer's idea of a chartered city, where everyone's got an interest in the city, at whatever kind of job you're in, surviving, because your livelihood relies on it. And the central bank governors, therefore, the people who are elected by all the citizens to run the central bank, are going to be held by them. So it doesn't need to be a massive administration, a massive bureaucracy, because everyone's in there, and it's the market and the work and the effort that's being put in that's going to dictate how much the shares are worth in the cooperative. And also it would be a bar to illegal immigration to this country, because only citizens would be allowed to have cooperative shares, and so the influence of non citizens from outside the country would be reduced, or those here illegally would be reduced. So you would have to have some sort of constitutional framework to get people to become citizens. This idea about cooperatives being in business or in social situations where it's blurring the lines between commercial and social obligations, perhaps blurring, or it's making more and more connections, is going to help the whole situation. Of course, as I said about the trains and transport, if you're a customer of that and you've got a share, or you're a worker in the cooperative, it's in your interests to produce good transport links and everything else. You know, one of the reasons in Britain, and also probably in the United States, where you've got private companies, is they want to get the maximum amount of passengers on the fewest amount of routes. You had a guy called Dr. Beeching who was in with the trucking associations over here and trucking firms, right? Who wanted to. He cut the rail network by half, so that everyone would have to either go by road or by rail, and those going by rail would, because they have less ability to get where they want to go, they have to pay a higher fare. You know, it's artificial scarcity, which is making unobtainable services, as well as at the same time, for people who can afford, They have so much stuff and wealth that they've got houses that they're not using. You've got unobtainable surplus for everybody in the middle. I mean, if we're all citizens and we're all paying in tax for all these things to give the rich tax breaks, it doesn't really make sense, does it? Because businesses are basically holding, and the rich are basically holding people hostage and ransom to where, um, Mitt Romney might say, "Oh well, I'll take my money out of, or I'll take my money out of the United States if you do any regulatory action against me speculating on a company that I was investing in and I made bust, artificially go bust." The government's not going to. The people who lose their jobs are going to blame the government because they don't understand. They're not. It's not that they're not incapable of understanding, but they've not been. The educational system has not taught them to rationally analyse what's going on in the economy, because economics is basically mostly at a level of university students, and then you've got bars and unobtainable surplus there. The structural problem goes right through the entire system. That's why you get like Ivy grade colleges in the United States, universities in the United States. You've got people who they've already been brought up to believe that they're in a special group of people and the system has worked well for them. So what are they going to do when they get into politics and business? They're going to reinforce that because they've got a community of interest to make sure that it happens that way. It's crazy because it's going to undermine the entire foundation of the nation and the economy. As I said before, like with Newt Gingrich, he wants to, open up the whole system of getting fossil fuels. And as one of my viewers, very intelligent person, said to me about clean coal and things like that. So yeah, that is a good idea, but you've got to also balance it with the fact that if you're coal mining, even if you find a clean way to burn it, to get yourself off of the resources that you're having to buy off your enemies who are killing your soldiers in the field in Afghanistan. If your enemy is only, each side is trying to co-opt the other, with the Saudis and Bin Laden on one side and the United States on the other, to push themselves into a situation, push their enemy into a situation where they have no option but to concede defeat. Yeah, it's getting all those social and economic and military connections enough to surround and cut them off through Fabian incrementalism and military Keynesianism off from their own forces. It's like three-dimensional chess. It's the best way to put it. But in the process of doing it, if you go to mine all those resources and gold and everything else and oil to get yourself away from that, you could be poisoning your water supply in Canada and everything else. And they wanted the North American Union so that they could get the water resources and oil in Canada, the labour of Mexico, and renew the infrastructure in the United States. So it was basically what the United States wanted, rather than some sort of idea of making globalism work. It's the United States' idea of capturing the entire North American continent for its own purposes. Not the United States as a nation, but the people who run the United States. With the different various factions within that. And that's going to continue until one or more factions has got no community of interest with the others. But if you're mining coal and everything else, and you're chopping down all the forest and everything else, it's not perhaps the best use of resources.